13 women murdered and thousands terrified to go out as the police hunted him down.
It just worries me sick, really. I will never go out on my own at night. We're all the same. It's terrible.
Tonight, as West Yorkshire Police apologise, we look back at how one of Britain's most notorious killers was brought to justice.
The two Sheffield officers went back to the scene and they found a hammer and a knife, I believe, and it was then they realised, oh, hang on a minute, this could be the Yorkshire Ripper.
Also on Look North, how Children in Need is helping young people to get on their bikes and get a job. And we find out about some of the crazy and spotty things you've been doing to help Pudsey raise money.
And we've seen some pleasant sunshine today, but will there be any in the forecast over the weekend? Join me for a full look at the weather right at the end of the programme.
Good evening and welcome to the programme. The Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, has died at the age of 74. The Bradford lorry driver was serving a life sentence in prison for murdering 13 women, 11 of them from Yorkshire, between 1975 and 1980, in Halifax, Huddersfield, Bradford and here in Leeds. 7 other women were attacked and it's believed many more may have suffered from his brutality, which spread fear among women afraid to walk the streets. The main police operation was centred here at what was Millgarth, where that shiny new multi-storey car park is behind me tonight. Well, this evening, the Chief Constable of West Yorkshire Police, John Robbins, has apologised to relatives today for the additional distress and anxiety caused by the language, tone and terminology used by senior police officers at the time in relation to Sutcliffe's victims. Many of them were sex workers. In a moment, we'll hear what impact his crimes had on women in the region, both then and to this very day. And we'll hear from the son of his first victim. We'll hear from Richard McCann. But first, I've been looking back at Peter Sutcliffe's horrific crimes and why it took so long to bring the killer to justice. The face of Peter William Sutcliffe, without doubt one of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century. For almost 6 years, this lorry driver from Bradford held whole communities in total fear. Sutcliffe used to cruise the red light areas of Yorkshire's towns and city centres. Between 1975 and 1981, he murdered 13 women and tried to kill 7 others. Most of the victims were sex workers. In October 1975, Wilma McCann was killed after being attacked with a hammer on Scotwell Avenue in Leeds. Her son Richard was just 5 years old at the time.
We were dressed in our pyjamas. Me and Sonny, my older sister, she just turned 7. We left the house with our coats on, over our pyjamas, wandering the streets. Before we wandered the streets, we went down the path on the field at the back of the house, which we later discovered was where she was found. Thankfully, it was dark and we were spared discovering Mum's body. But we sat and waited for about an hour at the local bus stop on Scotwell Road, and hoping that she was going to arrive. And as each bus came and went, it was obvious she wasn't coming home that morning. That was the day that changed my life.
Many victims were beaten about the head and their bodies mutilated.
We knew that we were dealing with a monster because of what he was doing. We realised that we'd got a serial killer on our hands, and I think it was in the newspapers. They gave him the name as the Yorkshire Ripper.
The hunt to identify the Ripper was one of the biggest police inquiries in history. 250,000 names had been individually filed on cards, and more than 30,000 statements were taken, but Sutcliffe remained at large.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me.
In 1978 and 79, police were sent what later turned out to be hoax tapes and letters, purporting to be from the killer. Detectives were mistakenly convinced the Ripper was from the northeast.
I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
I can remember there was one young detective new onto the inquiry, and he came in, and George Oldfield and others, they used to say, Right, has anybody got anything today? Anything anything of note that we, And I remember this young detective. Yes, I have, sir. He said, I've interviewed a man today. He fits the description, the photo fit description. He's got bushy hair, bushy beard, and he's got a gap in his teeth, and he's a lorry driver. And one of the top table officers said, is he a Geordie? And no. What's his name? He said, Peter Sutcliffe. Now listen, boys. Peter Sutcliffe is not the Yorkshire Ripper.
The lucky breakthrough finally came on the 2nd of January 1981. Sutcliffe was picked up by police here on Melbourne Avenue in Sheffield for what they thought was a minor motoring offence. Officers became suspicious when the number plates on Sutcliffe's Rover didn't match the tax disc on the windscreen. He was arrested and taken in for questioning. Sutcliffe was charged after confessing he was the Yorkshire Ripper. Large crowds gathered outside Dewsbury Magistrates Court in what became one of the defining images of the case. After he was jailed, his father spoke about his son's formative years.
He never took part in sport or anything of that description. He was a very quiet kid. He never seemed to bother with girls to any great extent until he met Sonia, the girl he eventually married.
Sutcliffe spent almost 4 decades behind bars. For a man who brought misery to so many in life, few, if any, are likely to mourn his death. Well, Wilma McCann was Peter Sutcliffe's first victim. She was murdered not too far from here at Scott Hall Avenue in Leeds, which is just up the road from where I'm standing now. Richard, her son, was just 5 years old at the time. Well, earlier today I spoke to Richard and asked him for his thoughts about the death of the Yorkshire Ripper.
Strange emotions. In fact, very little emotion. It's not an emotional time. What was emotional was hearing it from a little boy who was growing up now. My son brought the news to me. So for the very first time in like 40 odd years, I didn't hear about something that was associated with losing mum through the media. My son told me because he'd been told by his friend, and oh, that's the way it should be. So numb in some ways, not celebrating it. I don't want to celebrate the death of anybody.
Does this bring an element of closure, finally?
Yes. I mean, one, it was always going to happen. I was always not fearful of it happening, but aware that that day will occur. That day's occurred now. So that's dealt with. There's nothing like that can happen. No significant thing can happen in that way. But it's an odd day. It's an odd day. And one I'll be glad when it's over, to be fair. So I can get back to, getting on with my life. But he's the man that took my mum's life, and so it is significant. I wanted to be a voice for my mum. Do you know what I mean? Because she was just, until I did, she was just that black and white picture of that woman that, something, there's a bit of a positive element to see her son who'd moved on and such like.
You've had to live with the press spotlight on you over the years. Does this finally mean that weight will be lifted from your shoulders?
Yeah, that is a massive weight off my shoulders. Although we will still get mentions of him from time to time. When they report these stories, they remind us of what he did by listing the crimes and how he did it. So yes, I'm grateful that will decline, and we'll hopefully see an end to that.